if, like me, you missed the Senate confirmation hearing for Dr. Ben Carson as Secretary for HUD, Housing and Urban Development, I'm going to make up, well, actually not make up, I'm going to put together a video with clips from individual senators, and interest in fair reporting. The senators I'm going to put up there are the ones that actually pressed him somewhat. Now, the Republican senators that questioned him, it was basically a coronation, you know, as far as I'm concerned, and I didn't feel that there was any value. The one senator that I thought really hit the nail on the head was Senator Elizabeth Warren, and she basically nailed him, in my opinion. And he basically danced away from her questions regarding enriching President Trump, since we all know that Donald Trump's main claim to fame is housing, and he in particular has public housing that he basically owns, runs in Sterrett City, which is in New York. Now, in my opinion, Ben Carson is totally unqualified for this position. This man, also in my opinion, though he loves to tout his Christian faith and moral compass, etc., in my opinion, he really doesn't have any. I say that because of his denigration of black people, let's just call it the way it is, his disrespect to President Obama, but you know, that's between him and President Obama. But he really lacks, in my opinion, the moral compass, moral compassion for the people that are not as privileged in this country. Now, that being said, I'm going to play the opening remarks from Mr. Crapo, great name, who is the chairman for the Finance Committee, which HUD falls under. I'm going to play the remarks from Sherrod Brown. He's the Democrat from Ohio, and he is, I'm trying to remember his position. I believe it's the ranking member. That's what it is, ranking member. And then I'm going to play a couple of clips, one from Elizabeth Warren, which I think you need to pay particular attention to. And then there's another senator, and I forget her name, but I'll mention it as she's getting ready to speak. And I thought that her questioning basically really focused on it, his lack of, again, a moral fortitude. So here we go, opening with Committee Chairman Crapo, followed by Sherrod Brown. When Sherrod Brown has an opportunity to ask him a couple of questions, that's going to, in my opinion, hit home somewhat. And then I'm going to jump to Elizabeth Warren and then the last Democratic questioner. Please note that a Republican senator jumped to Mr. Carson's defense regarding Senator Warren's questionnaires regarding not really knowing the holdings of Donald Trump, but I'll get into that as it proceeds. Here we go.
Through some very important territory during this session. This morning we will hear testimony on the nomination for the Secretary of the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. We'll begin today's hearing with an opening statement by me and the ranking member. And we will then turn to Senator Rubio, who will introduce the Secretary-designate, Dr. Benjamin Carson. And welcome Dr. Carson to the committee. We will then follow the early bird rule, meaning that members will be recognized by the chair in the order of seniority for those who were present at the time the gavel came down, and in order of arrival thereafter. Each member will be allotted 5 minutes for the number of rounds that time will permit. Dr. Benjamin Carson was raised by a single mother in an impoverished part of the city of Detroit. He attended Yale University and the University of Michigan Medical School and later became a highly accomplished and respected neurosurgeon. Dr. Carson was named Director of Pediatric Neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital in 1984 at the age of 33, the youngest such director in the nation. He gained national fame in the 1980s by becoming the first doctor to lead an operation that separated twins conjoined at the head, one of many high-profile operations led by Dr. Carson. In addition to his successful career as a surgeon, Dr. Carson is also a decorated author, a speaker who has written numerous best-selling books on a range of topics. He also ran for president in this past election and spent months traveling the country and listening to the American people about the problems and issues that they face, including with respect to housing. Throughout his career, Dr. Carson has achieved a great deal of success. He has demonstrated a fervent intensity for improving the lives of his fellow Americans, and his intellect, leadership, and life experiences are unique, valuable assets for leading an agency like HUD. Dr. Carson has said he plans to continue his conversation with the American people and do a listening tour if confirmed. This is an encouraging sign that Dr. Carson wants to hear from stakeholders and, more importantly, from the American people. I hope to work with Dr. Carson on how to reimagine housing policy at HUD. I look forward to working on streamlining requirements for local public housing authorities, especially for smaller housing authorities. One example is the Small Public Housing Authority Opportunities Act, which seeks to encourage innovative approaches to determining tenant rents and to adjust the level of federal oversight over small housing authorities. We should also look at the Section 8 moving to work, rental assistance demonstration, and public housing programs where there has been interest in reform for many years. I hope to work with Dr. Carson on improvements to the programs that would produce cost savings, reduce burdens on local housing authorities, and encourage self-sufficiency. Another issue this committee has worked on are home equity conversion mortgages, which we call around here HECMs. It's important that we evaluate these important parts of our system, and I look forward to working with you on that program as well, Dr. Carson. While the low-income housing tax credit is under Finance Committee's jurisdiction, it's very important to us in the U.S. housing market. It provides essential capital to underserved communities and provides key financing for small and rural affordable housing developments. Tackling our homelessness, especially among our nation's veterans, is another issue that is important to me and other members of this committee. It is critical that HUD allow local communities to craft solutions that work best for their community needs. I hope to work with Dr. Carson and with other members of this committee on these and many other issues of critical need. At this time, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 17 letters and other statements that have been submitted in support of Dr. Carson's nomination. I won't at this point read all of them. I suspect throughout the hearing we may read or reference to a number of these letters, but I do want to just highlight a couple of the first few. This includes letters from Bart Harvey, the former chair and CEO of Enterprise Community Partners, and a longtime affordable housing advocate. It also includes a bipartisan letter from 4 former HUD secretaries: Henry Cisneros, former Senator Mel Martinez, Alfonso Jackson, and Stephen Preston. Without objection, so ordered. I look forward to hearing from Dr. Carson today. Before we do that, though, we're going to turn first to Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this hearing. Congratulations on your new role in leading this committee. I echo what Senator Crapo said about his and my relationship. We've worked together on the Finance Committee on a number of issues and known each other for many years and had 3 or 4 already productive meetings since it was clear that he was going to be the chairman of this committee. Welcome our new members, Senator Schatz, Senator Van Hollen, Senator Cortez Masto, good to see you, Senator Kennedy, Senator Tillis, and Senator Perdue. Glad that all of you are on the committee. I look forward to working with each of you. Dr. Carson, I welcome you. Mrs. Carson, it was nice to meet you today, and I have not yet met your sons, but I have not met your lovely little granddaughter. I know you have a couple other granddaughters that couldn't make it today. I want to thank you for your willingness to serve our country along with your husband and father and grandfather. As Chairman Crapo noted, Dr. Carson's a distinguished neurosurgeon. His remarkable life story is well known to all of us and to millions of Americans. He's an inspiration and a testament to the American dream. Much as we might wish otherwise, many children won't have the same combination of fortitude and a firm hand and a good fortune that allowed Dr. Carson to rise to the highest levels of medicine and the highest levels of our society. For some perspective, one study of medical students showed that only about 5% came from households with incomes under $20,000. Different research has shown that only 1 in 13 Americans will move from the lowest income quintile to the highest over a lifetime. Of course, we encourage and should encourage children and adults to follow Dr. Carson's example of getting a good education, working hard, and all that he has done. We should bear in mind, though, that many still face significant barriers to realizing that potential. For those who cannot overcome the odds on their own, should we not help them? Dr. Carson has repeatedly commented that government assistance programs are harmful. He wrote that in the wake of the civil rights movement, quote, racist people from both parties adopted a paternalistic attitude toward African Americans and enacted federal and state programs designed to take care of people who couldn't take care of themselves, people who were ignorant, stupid, or just plain lazy. Why would we do this? To again quote Dr. Carson, the only reason I can imagine that it would be a good idea for government to foster dependency in large groups of citizens is to cultivate a dependable voting bloc that will guarantee continued power as long as entitlements are provided. Dr. Carson has suggested that all assistance programs should be cut by 10% a year until the budget is balanced, without exceptions, without regard to whether the population served is vulnerable. Even social insurance programs, social insurance meaning you pay in when you need it, layoff, illness, retirement, or death. That social insurance programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, which he believes are, quote, socialist leanings, even they should be subject to this 10% cut. Over 5 million Americans look to HUD for help. We're reaching only 1 of 4 eligible families. Many end up on years-long waiting lists simply because of lack of funding. They qualify, they're in the waiting list because there are not enough dollars available. A 10% cut, in addition to the shortages we now have, a 10% cut, or the inadequacies we have, a 10% cut would send hundreds of thousands of families into a tailspin. For some, literally, it might be a matter of life and death. I should note that Dr. Carson's made clear that he thinks criticisms of his views on federal assistance are unwarranted. So today is an opportunity for him to shed more light on these seemingly contradictory views of federal assistance. I appreciated our individual time we had earlier this week to begin to explore that. We want to know more. Since 1968, HUD has been charged with ensuring that all people, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, or whether they have a disability, that all people have fair and equal access to housing, and that its grantees affirmatively further, that's the language, affirmatively further this policy. Here too, Dr. Carson has been critical. In one of the few statements he's made on the subject of this hearing and the subject of his new job, and one of the few statements he has made on housing policy, he called into question more than 4 decades of civil rights law. He disparaged HUD's efforts to reduce segregation as, quote, social engineering schemes designed to legislate racial equality. When Dr. Carson and I met a couple of days ago, we discussed the tragic effects of lead in my state and nationwide. Dr. Carson knows better than the rest of us, in a more scientific way, if you will, the terrible price that children in society pay for the legacy of lead in paint, industrial settings, and in water. I appreciate our conversation and look forward to hearing more about his views on HUD's role in removing lead hazards. Throughout his campaign, the President-elect promised to rebuild America's cities, which he labeled hellholes. Mr. Trump spelled out his views in this document, his, quote, New Deal for Black America, with a plan for urban renewal. The plan covers issues such as school choice, investing in law enforcement, trade, of course, tax reform, and infrastructure investment. But at a time when more than 11 million families pay more than half their income towards rent. Think of that. 11 million families spend more than half their income on rent. 500,000 people have no place to call home. The President-elect, the President-elect's plan has nothing about housing. Dr. Carson, I know you and the President-elect have talked at length about his urban renewal agenda. I'm glad we have the chance today to learn more about that agenda, the role housing will play, and how you will help to deliver on his promises to create safer communities and better infrastructure, including and especially in light of your charge, including our public housing stock. Welcome again to you, to Candy, to your family, and in front of the committee. Thank you.
All right, Rubio's going to introduce him, so I'm going to skip past that.
Thank you, Senator Rubio, and you're certainly welcome to stay, but I know you've got other responsibilities to attend to. We appreciate you taking your time to come and introduce Dr. Carson. Dr. Carson, before we turn the floor over to you, it is necessary that I place you under oath. Would you please stand and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Do you agree to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of the Senate? I do. You may sit down. Dr. Carson, your written statement will be made a part of the record in its entirety, and you may now make your oral statement as you choose. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
May I interrupt you before you get started? I should have said I encourage you to introduce your family. I think you were about to do that anyway, but
Yes.
You are certainly welcome to please introduce your family who have come to be with you.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, Senator Brown. Thanks to Senator Rubio for that kind introduction. Thank you for members of the committee, virtually all of whom I've met with have been very gracious, and I very much appreciate that. Thanks also to President-elect Trump for his friendship, leadership, and for his trust for such an important role. I would like to introduce my family. Directly behind me is my wife, Candy, of 41 years, my college sweetheart. And starting from this end, my oldest son, Murray, another Yalie, who is an engineer, and his wife, Lerone, who is a youth pastor, and my daughter-in-law, Merlin, who is a physician and a businesswoman, and my granddaughter, Tesora, who is just a sweetie, and my middle son, Ben Jr., or BJ as we affectionately call him, a very successful entrepreneur businessman. And our good friend, Marcia Jackson, wife of former Secretary Alfonso Jackson. And I think you probably know the others here. But Royce is...
Is that Omarosa? Yeah, that's Omarosa. What the hell is she doing there?
Others here. But Royce is, oh, there he is. Okay. My youngest son, Royce, and his father-in-law, Alexander Shapa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we welcome you all to the committee today. Dr. Carson, you may proceed.
you know, as a youngster, I remember actually feeling that I was pretty lucky. We lived in a 750 square foot GI home in Southwest. We thought that was paradise. And then my parents got divorced. And, you know, my mother discovered that my father was married to someone else. And she didn't have any skills, basically third grade education. We had no place to live. She couldn't afford the house. So we ended up moving to Boston, moving in with relatives. So I have actually, in my life, understood what housing insecurity was. And we were there in Boston for a couple of years. And I remember as a 9-year-old looking through a building across the street out of which all the windows had been broken, and a sunbeam was shining through it. And it made me think about my future. I remember thinking that I probably would never live to be 25, because that's what I saw around me. But my mother had very different ideals. You know, she worked extraordinarily hard as a domestic, leaving the house at 5 in the morning, getting back at midnight, day after day after day. And her strong desire was not to be dependent on anybody else. And people were always criticizing her, and they said, you have 2 boys, you can be on 8 dependent children. She said, no, I can't. And she worked very hard. She would sometimes take us to the homes that she cleaned. And many of them were fabulous homes. And she would say, would you rather live in this wonderful place, or would you rather live where we live? And she would say, you know, the person who has the most to do with determining where you live is you. It's not somebody else. It's not the environment. You know, that made a very strong impression on me. And she insisted later on, when we were able to return to Detroit, still not to our idyllic home. We still couldn't afford to live there. Still in a multi-family, dilapidated place with rats and roaches. But nevertheless, she was independent. And we still had that dream of being able to get back there. But I was a terrible student, and she insisted that I read. She insisted that my brother read. We weren't very enthusiastic about that, but back in those days, you had to do what your parents told you. And as I started reading, I began to discover a whole new world. We were desperately poor, but between the covers of those books, I could go anywhere, I could be anybody, I could do anything. And within the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, much to the consternation of all those students who used to call me dummy. They were now coming to me saying, Benny, how do you work this problem? And I'd say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. I was perhaps a little obnoxious, but it sure felt good to say that to those turkeys. But, you know, I had a very different impression of who I was at that point. And, you know, it's one of the reasons that Candy and I started the Carson Scholars Fund, a component of which are reading rooms. And we put in reading rooms all over the country. We have 165 of them now, primarily in Title I schools where kids come from homes with no books. They go to a school with no library or poorly funded library. They're not likely to become readers. As you know, 70 to 80% of high school dropouts are functionally illiterate. And if we can truncate that downstream, you can change the trajectory of their lives. And that's really what it's about, changing lives and providing opportunities for people. It makes all the difference in the world. You know, we had a program at Hopkins, and I would have 700 to 800 students at a time come in on a regular basis. If you came to Johns Hopkins, some of you probably have, you saw all the school buses around. That was bringing in the kids and trying to encourage them in terms of what they could do. And I got involved in a lot of the programs in Baltimore with the East Baltimore Community Development, Inc., and with the community school, and with all the schools and the mayors. And, you know, that was a very important part of my life, even though I was an extraordinarily busy surgeon. And I do believe that government can play a very important role. I know some have distorted what I've said about government, but I believe government is important. And it is there, I believe, to promote life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What has happened too often is that people who seemingly mean well have promoted things that do not encourage the development of innate talent in people. And hence we have generation after generation of people living in dependent situations. It's not that they're bad people, it's that this is what they've been given. This is all they know in many cases. I think we have an opportunity here to do something about that. If we take a more holistic approach. When we talk about HUD traditionally, most people think putting houses over putting roofs over the heads of poor people. But it has the ability to be so much more than that, particularly if we take a holistic approach. And we think about how do we develop our fellow human beings. I see each individual as human capital that can be developed to become part of the engine that drives our nation, or if not developed, becomes part of the load. And we are the ones who are tasked with helping to make the difference. So I do believe that government is extraordinarily important. And one of the things that I want to do, instead of just listening to the sage people of Washington, D.C., and there's some wise people here, I want to go on a listening tour. I want to hear from the people with boots on the ground who are actually administering programs, who are benefiting from the programs. I want to see what actually works and what does not work. I want to analyze why it works and why it doesn't work. Before I go on the road to do that, I want to do that at HUD. We have people there who've been there for 10, 20, 30, even 40 years. And I don't think a lot of people listen to what they have to say. I suspect that they have garnered a tremendous amount of information. And I want to get that information from them. I want to work with them on a regular basis. Some people say, but medicine, why would you go into something like HUD? Well, I actually believe that there's a tremendous nexus, a great intersection, because good health has a lot to do with a good environment. And after working so hard on so many people and then putting them back into an environment with lead and with all kinds of inducements for asthma and other chronic diseases, that's not very, very helpful. And I'm looking forward to, the Safe and Healthy Homes program at HUD and enhancing that program very significantly. Why is all of this so important? Well, there was a Brookings study, a very important study, which showed that if people did 3 things, their likelihood of living in poverty would be 2% or less. And that's really what we want to do, keep people from living in poverty. Those 3 things were graduate from high school, get a job, and wait until you're married to have children. Think about that. And, what that means is that there are points of intervention, things that we can do to make a difference in people's lives. Also, think about this fact. In terms of our human capital that's being wasted, we have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the prison inmates. That means there's something wrong. We have high recidivism rates. We have people who go into prison with little education and little in the way of skills, and they come out with little education and little in the way of skills. So what are they going to do? They go back to doing what they were doing before, hence we have these high recidivism rates. We need to think about how do we give them education? How do we give them skills? How do we cultivate the innate talent that is in those individuals so that they become part of the engine once again? And recognize we only have 330 million people. Now, that sounds like a lot of people, but that's a quarter of the people they have in India or China. We're going to have to compete with those nations into the future, which means we have to develop all of our talent. Now you say, well, that all sounds great and wonderful, but you were a pediatric neurosurgeon. how could you have anything wonderful to say about any of these things? Well, you know, I have to chuckle when I hear people say things like that, because there's an assumption that you can only do one thing, and that we have these very limited brains and they're incapable of learning anything else. I find that kind of humorous, particularly knowing what the human brain is capable of. Billions of neurons, hundreds of billions of interconnections can process more than 2 million bits of information in 1 second. Any brain can do that. You can't overload it. You hear some people say you overload your brain. You can't do it. If you learned one new fact every second, it would take you more than 3 million years to challenge the capacity of your brain. So we do have the ability to learn. More importantly, we have the ability to work together. And that is absolutely critical. We in America, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, we are not each other's enemies. We must come to that understanding. There are real people out there who really want to destroy us, but we don't need to be doing that ourselves. We need to be combining our collective intellect. And one of the things that I learned in my private life as a board member at Kellogg for 18 years and Costco for 16 years is how to select a good CEO. And I'll tell you, a good CEO doesn't necessarily know everything about the business. He's not a marketing specialist. He may not be a financial specialist. There are many things that he doesn't know, but he knows how to pick those people and how to use them. And that is one of the marks of good leadership. So in closing, you know, I've been very fortunate to be able to move from the bottom rung of the socioeconomic level to the top rung, and to understand how people feel in all those different levels. And I got to tell you, we're all in the same boat. And if part of the boat sinks, the rest of it is going down too. And it means what we need to do is exercise true compassion. True compassion is not keeping people in a situation where we can feel good about what we're doing. True compassion is putting them in a situation where they can feel good about where they're going. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carson. We'll now go to 5-minute increments for members of the committee to question and discuss issues with you. And I encourage both you and the members to keep an eye on the clock. If we start running over, you'll hear me tap the gavel as a reminder that it's time to wrap up, so that we can all have a fair opportunity for our participation. And I will begin first, and then we'll turn to Senator Brown.
All right, I'm jumping over him into Sherrod Brown because basically all this guy did was give them the floor to further expunge things. But now, before I do that, a lot of the stuff that he said was a bunch of crap, okay? One of the first things he said was that his mother told him that he is or has the power to decide where he wants to live. Well, I guess his mother decided that she didn't want to live in Detroit because she had to move, okay? I guess she decided that rather than accept some kind of public assistance, which would have helped her and her kids, that it was better to be independent, okay, which in turn denied certain benefits of life to her two sons. Oh, and by the way, Dr. Ben Carson's first set of glasses, she didn't pay for them. She got them through a public grant. So for him to say that was a bunch of crap. Now, if any of you are familiar, Dr. Ben Carson consistently talks about wanting to hit his mother in the head with a hammer, and how he was this big bad gangbanger and tried to stab somebody, and the only reason he didn't stab them was because the knife hit a belt. I don't believe that crap for a second. Not one single second, okay? And then they moved back to Detroit, where, again, that's where supposedly the hitting in the head with the hammer occurred, and also the stabbing or attempted stabbing of, I guess, one of his schoolmates occurred. So this guy goes from being at the bottom of the barrel to the top of the barrel, and then makes a statement that only an adult would make, as far as sit at my feet, blah, blah, blah. Nah, all of that crap is made up, and people have looked for confirmation of those facts, and nobody can find those things. They even spoke to his mother, and she wouldn't verify his story. Anyway, here's Sherrod Brown's questioning on Ben Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to begin by asking Nancy to enter the record letters that I've received, and our staffs can work together to make sure we're not duplicating that. You see, if you would.
Without objection.
Thank you. And I also wanted to announce, and I neglected my opening statement, that Senators Reed from Rhode Island and Warner from Virginia both have responsibilities as ranking members on armed services and intelligence to do hearings on confirmation hearings today, and could not join us, but wanted to be here. So I wanted to say that. Thank you for your statements. I appreciate many of the ideas and goals you expressed. Some, however, as you, I think, know by now, are inconsistent with statements you've made over the past few years. If confirmed, I think you understand you'll be held to the ideas you've expressed today, not ones necessarily you may have written or talked about in the presidential race. You testified that you want to make communities more inclusive. This seems at odds with one of the only housing policies that prior to this nomination that you have taken a public stand on, fair housing. As I mentioned, your 2015 column in the Washington Times critiqued HUD's then new rule to affirmatively further fair housing. You characterized that rule as a government-engineered attempt to legislate racial equality. You likened it to a failed socialist experiment. Please elaborate for this committee on your view of HUD's role implementing the Fair Housing Act, especially including the requirement that HUD's grantees affirmatively further fair housing.
Well, thank you, Senator Brown, for that question and an opportunity to actually explain that, because it has been distorted by many people. As you probably know, that act says that we want people who are receiving HUD grants to look around and see if they find anything that looks like discrimination. And then we want them to come up with a solution on how to solve the problem. They're not responding to people saying that there's a problem. They're saying, go and look for a problem and then give us a solution. And what I believe to be the case is we have people sitting around desks in Washington, D.C. deciding on how things should be done. You know, telling mayors and commissioners and people, you need to build this place right here, and you need to put these kinds of people in it. What I would encourage...
Okay, right off the bat, that's not true. What normally happens is a city or community will look at its need and then go to HUD with a plan in order to satisfy their need, and the need normally is based on the population and the demand for housing. So it's not Washington coming into Scranton, Pennsylvania and saying, hey, go build that house over there and go fill it with low-income people. No, it's a place like Scranton that has a bunch of people and a long waiting list for public housing, looking at the various programs that HUD has, and then making a proposal to HUD in order to build housing, in order to satisfy the demand that they have for public housing. So number one, right off the bat, you know, he's talking about top to bottom, where it actually works bottom to top.
I don't have any problem whatsoever with affirmative action or at least, you know, integration. I have no problem with that at all. But I do have a problem with people on high dictating it when they don't know anything about what's going on in the area. We have local HUD officials, and we have people who can assess what the problems are in their area, and working with local officials can come up with much better solutions than a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter program from people in Washington, D.C.
See, that's exactly what they do. So he's describing a situation that is currently in effect. It works from the bottom to the top, not the top to the bottom. And his statement is totally erroneous.
Not to affirmatively further, your objection is whether that's done from Washington or the HUD office in Columbus, Ohio.
My objection is central dictation to people's lives.
Let me explore further. Along those same lines, I want to hear your views on the housing rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people. These people also face discrimination, as you know, and alarmingly high rates of youth homelessness and bullying. Your statement mentions your desire to improve the lives of all families and communities, quote, no matter their race, creed, color, or orientation. Yet you have in the past raised questions about whether LGBTQ people should enjoy the same rights as everyone else. Do you believe that HUD has a duty to take actions that promote equal access to housing opportunities for LGBTQ people?
If confirmed in this position, of course I would enforce all the laws of the land. And I believe that all Americans, regardless of any of the things that you mentioned, should be protected by the law. What I have mentioned in the past is the fact that no one gets extra rights. Extra rights means you get to redefine everything for everybody else. That to me doesn't seem to be very
That's what we're talking about. But
All right, so now apparently he believes that the LGBTQ community are trying to get extra rights. That is just plain bullshit. What they're trying to do is to get equal rights. But Mr. Carson, who is a known homophobe, just putting it out there, basically does not believe in equality for everybody. He is leaning back on his quote-unquote Christian background and morality in order to indicate that since he's not for that particular community, he believes that they should not have, again, the same rights to housing, and obviously he's against gay marriage as well. The other rights that all citizens of this country are supposed to enjoy.
I'm glad to hear you say that moving forward you will respect that.
Absolutely.
Last question, Mr. Chair, as time runs short. We've seen a dramatic increase in affordable housing needs in this country, as you've pointed out, Dr. Carson, in recent years. 11 million families, as I said earlier, a quarter of all renters pay more than half their income for housing, struggling to make ends meet. One thing goes wrong, a temporary layoff, hours cut back, illness, they lose their home. We talked in my office about the Matthew Desmond book, Evicted, which I hope you will read, and I know some of your staff has already,
Yes.
about people's lives being turned upside down when they're evicted. Their children's school district changes, they lose their possessions, they never quite catch up again, their credit, all of those things that happen when half of their income goes to housing. I am surprised the President-elect's urban agenda does not even mention housing, as we talked about. You had told me about your conversations with the President-elect about an urban agenda. Have you had discussions with him about your plans for housing or his plans for housing? Tell us what those plans, tell us what plans have come from those discussions.
Yes, yes, we have talked. In fact, we talked this morning. You have to attack the problem that you described from both ends. There are a large number of people spending 30 to 50% of their income on housing, and that's an unacceptable number. So what we have to do is either raise their income or decrease the cost of the housing. I think both of those areas are areas that we need to work upon.
Do you support raising the minimum wage, and do you support the overtime rule, which in my state alone or in your home state of Michigan meant more than $100,000 in each state? People got raises that are making $30,000 and $40,000 a year. If we're talking about raising income, particularly the overtime rule would mean real dollars in people's pockets that are working 50 and 60 hours a week. Do you support those?
I support creating an environment that encourages entrepreneurial risk-taking and capital investment, which are the engines that drove America from no place to the pinnacle of the world in record time.
See, now that's bullshit, okay? Because yes, if you are in a position to be an entrepreneur, that is a great thing, and I obviously encourage everyone who has the ability and the assets in order to do that to take that avenue. But everybody cannot be an entrepreneur. If they were, then you would have no labor force, okay? So if you're against raising the minimum wage for people who absolutely are not going to be entrepreneurs, they are going to be laborers of some type, raising the minimum wage is one of the few ways that you will be able to bring up their incomes. But apparently you don't recognize that, and now you're going to try to dance around the question.
So I guess that means you don't support the overtime rule or the minimum wage?
It means exactly that my philosophy is that we can increase people's minimum wages by increasing opportunities for them and creating an environment where those opportunities exist rather than artificially trying to change it.
Okay, and based on what he just said, increasing opportunities, which would mean more businesses, which would mean those same people would be able to get a higher income because of competition. But that, in retrospect, means that the amount of available labor would be greatly reduced. So you would, and it's been proven, you cannot go to a zero unemployment rate because your productivity rates will begin to decline. Thank you, Dr. Carson.
I don't think, and last point, I don't think it's artificial that someone that works 50 or 60 hours a week and has been classified as management can work those hours over 40, making $35,000 a year and not get paid for those hours. I don't think that's artificial when the employer has denied them that straight time or especially time and a half.
I agree it's not artificial, but you create the right environment, that employer will have to pay them more because the competition will require it of them.
All right, Senator Shelby.
Yeah, that's a bunch of crap. All right, I'm going to jump to I think I'm going to jump to Tim Scott. Hang on. All right, I'm going to jump to Tim Scott later, but this is, in my opinion, the most important questionnaire. This was the questionnaire done by Elizabeth Warren. Here we go.
Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your new role as chair of this committee. I'm looking forward to working with you as well as with 6 new members of our committee. And Dr. Carson, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Before we get into some of the questions that I raised in my letter to you earlier this week, I just want to get an answer to, I think, a simple yes or no question. If you are confirmed to lead HUD, you'll be responsible for issuing billions of dollars in grants and loans to help develop housing and provide a lot of housing-related services. Now, housing development is an area in which President-elect Trump and his family have significant business interests. Can you assure me that not a single taxpayer dollar that you give out will financially benefit the president-elect or his family?
Well, Senator, I was worried that you wouldn't get back. Thank you for coming back.
I'm back.
I can assure you that the things that I do are driven by a sense of morals and values. And therefore, I will absolutely not play favorites for anyone.
Dr. Carson, let me stop right there. I'm actually trying to ask a more pointed question, and it's not about your good faith. That's not my concern. My concern is whether or not, among the billions of dollars that you will be responsible for handing out in grants and loans, can you just assure us that not $1 will go to benefit either the president-elect or his family?
It will not be my intention to do anything to benefit any American.
I understand that.
Okay, now did you hear what he said? It's not his intention to do anything that will benefit any American. He got flustered there and he misspoke. All right, now he's gonna clean it up, but he just misspoke because he said it wasn't his intention to do anything that would benefit any American. Okay, here we go. She's getting under his skin a little bit.
For all Americans,
But
everything that we did.
Do I take that to mean that you may manage programs that will significantly benefit the president-elect?
You can take it to mean that I will manage things in a way that benefits the American people. That is going to be the goal.
To the best you understand that.
If there happens to be an extraordinarily good program that's working for millions of people, and it turns out that someone that you're targeting is going to gain, $10 from it, am I going to say, no, the rest of you Americans can't have it? I think logic and common sense probably would be the best way.
Yeah, although we do have a problem here, and I appreciate your good faith in this, and I do, Dr. Carson. The problem is that you can't assure us that HUD money, not of $10 varieties, but of multi-million-dollar varieties, will not end up in the president-elect's pockets. And the reason you can't assure us of that is because the president-elect is hiding his family's business interests from you, from me, from the rest of America. And this just highlights the absurdity and the danger of the president-elect's refusal to put his assets in a true blind trust. He knows, the president-elect knows, what will benefit him and his family financially, but the public doesn't, which means he can divert taxpayer money into his own pockets without anyone knowing about it. The only way that the American people can know that the president is working in their best interests and not in his own is if he divests and puts his assets in a true blind trust. Transferring his holdings to his children does nothing, as the head of the Nonpartisan Ethics Committee said just last night. Since the president-elect refuses to address this voluntarily, we need to pass the Presidential Conflicts of Interest Act that I introduced with more than 20 of my colleagues, which would require him to do so.
All right, so Carson tried to give a flippant answer and throw in a bullshit $10 figure out there, and nobody would even know if somebody made just $10. And it's not in the Trump's DNA to work on small deals. They have to make millions off of whatever they get involved with, and he damn well knows it.
So, with the time I have left, I just want to follow up very quickly on a letter that I sent to you earlier this week and that we talked about in my office.
And I appreciated that.
Good. And I appreciated it too. As you know, more than 7 million children rely on HUD for housing. 7 million people, many of them are children, veterans, people with disabilities. For many of these people, HUD is the difference between a stable home and life out on the streets. But one major problem that we talked about is lead exposure. And according to the most recent HUD study, 62,000 public housing units, nearly 6% of our total public housing stock, are in need of lead abatement. You are a highly accomplished doctor. We spoke at length about the implications of lead and lead poisoning on our children. Can I just ask you to commit today that you will make sure that HUD resources are dedicated to dramatically reducing the number of public housing units where lead is a problem?
I can assure you that I will very much be working with you on that. 310,000 cases right now of children, each of which cost us enormous amounts of money. I don't think people even calculate that into that when we're talking about it. So yes, I will be very vigorous in that area.
I very much appreciate it. This is a particular problem for us in the Northeast. It is a particular problem in Boston where our housing stock is old.
Right.
And it is absolutely critical that we get the lead out of these housing units and that our children have a chance to grow up without being injured by our own negligence. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you for your leadership in that area.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Carson.
All right, I will give it to Carson though. You know, being honest, when they basically tutored him on all the stuff that was going on, they gave him a pretty good tutoring, so that he's pretty much up on most of the things that people are talking about. So nobody ever said he was stupid. Now, being racially insensitive to his own people and having a lack of real morality, as far as I'm concerned, is one thing. But stupidity, no, that's not Ben Carson. All right, I'm going to jump to the next questioner. Okay, here's Tim Scott, and I got a serious question for him. But let's listen to his questioning and his statements.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to your new chairmanship, and we all wish you much success. I would also ask for unanimous consent to add to the record from the South Carolina African American Chamber of Commerce a letter of support on behalf of Dr. Carson.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Dr. Carson, and to your family, thank you all for being willing to serve. No question, if you are confirmed, your entire family will feel the impact of your service to this country. There's no doubt that if there's a person in this country that has really no reason to offer yourself to public service after all that you've already done, it would be you. You've done a fabulous job and been a great example for many of us in many ways. And like Senator Menendez suggested, his background as well as my background and yours are very similar. I reached a type of conclusion that you have, however, that there is so much potential inside the human heart and the human head, the brain, that we ought to look for ways to expose that potential. Exactly. Allow for people to experience their full potential. That is such an important part of the equation, and I believe, like you believe, I think, that the greatest thing that we can do for folks is help them find the path to their own independence. Exactly. It is not to suggest that government does not have a role. It is however to suggest that government does not have the role in someone's life, and I think that your life demonstrates that, as well as your answers to so many of the questions. I think it's been very important. I also want to thank you for your desire to do a listening tour. We have had many issues around housing for many decades, frankly. When I was on the county level as the chairman of a county council in South Carolina, we had housing concerns and issues, and listening to the very people who live in the housing is such an important part of the formula that we should produce that will benefit the American people, and specifically the American people within public housing. And so that willingness is important. I wish that the outgoing administration had the same objective of listening. Even the senators would be kind of interesting. I would encourage you to listen to the senators and folks who appoint you to the position at HUD. Whether that's Democrats or Republicans, it's very important to remain responsive. And I will use one case in point. There was a housing tragedy in Florida where Marco Rubio and Senator Nelson spent an enormous amount of time uncovering the challenges and the lack of inspections in HUD housing. We invited HUD to participate in one of the hearings. No one showed up.
Now, that I was pretty much with him until he got to this point. You are a U.S. Senator, as is Marco Rubio, as is Senator Nelson. You mean to tell me that you called the head of HUD or the assistant head of HUD, told them what your concerns were, and please don't try to tell me that you don't have their phone numbers. So if you did in fact reach out to HUD, I want to know exactly who you reached out to. And I'm not talking about calling into some kind of a general phone number and getting a clerk or a low-level secretary and asking and letting them know that you were having a meeting. I'm talking about reaching out to a power that be within HUD. So I'm not buying that particular one.
$47 billion agency, thousands of employees here in Washington, D.C., and we couldn't find anyone to listen. Listen to the elected officials who had serious concerns about the living conditions of people in public housing. Not a single employee could find their way into the United States chambers. I can't imagine how that made them feel about their government, about their opportunities for success, about their opportunities to find the next rung on the ladder. I expect that under your leadership, the experience will be very different.
Let me stop him right there. If the people felt bad, they did not elect the people or hire the people at HUD. They should have, if they didn't, they should have brought their concerns to their elected leaders, and it was their elected leaders' failure to push into HUD to get someone at HUD to listen to them. So again, I'm not buying that.
Incredibly different than that.
One of the things I found refreshing about your approach is indeed the notion of a fresh start in housing. As someone who holistically understands and appreciates the necessity of affordable, clean, stable housing as a part of that journey to the American dream, I would love to hear your thoughts on how you incorporate the holistic approach to the new opportunity that, if presented to you, you'll do a fantastic job there.
Well, thank you, Senator Scott, and also for the wonderful example that you are for millions of people. The reason that I concentrate so much on the holistic approach is because when I look back historically at an agency like HUD, and there have been a lot of good programs, and one program after another, and they've been targeted at specific problems, and it's good. But the progress perhaps has not been as great as one would like to see. And one of the things that I discovered as a neurosurgeon is you're much more effective when you bring in a bigger picture view of things. Don't just look at, the tumor that somebody has in their brain, but look at the whole person and how can you bring health to this entire individual, and how can you then put them into an environment where they can thrive? And that's the same principle that I'm looking at here. The programs that have been enacted in HUD over the years, they're good programs, but in and of themselves, they're not bringing about the elevation of large numbers of people. And that's what we're really looking for. We don't want it to be a way of life. We want it to be a Band-Aid and a springboard to move forward. So that's why I place so much emphasis on education. And that's why I place so much emphasis on health care. I'm not just talking about lead abatement, but I'm talking about perhaps putting clinics into neighborhoods so that people don't rely on the emergency room where it costs 5 times more and where you don't get the kind of follow-up that will prevent you from having stage 5 renal disease.
All right, just something that I just wanted to bring to your attention. Every time Ben Carson starts the bullshit, his hands come up in the air and he starts talking with his hands, okay? Just so that you know. Number two, now he's talking about areas that his particular department has no say-so over. Now, in my opinion, HUD provides housing. Good housing, clean housing, etc., is what its mandate should be for people that are in need. Translation, it's not a springboard, it's a safety net. It's a foundation from which they can go forward. So maybe it can be classified as a springboard, but I classify it as a foundation. And then you build upon that foundation. That's not what he's talking about. And he's all over the place.
That's what I'm talking about by a holistic approach. It saves us so much money if we begin to think that way.
Fresh start. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Schott.
All right, I'm gonna jump to one additional, actually, I believe it's going to be two additional pieces of testimony. And if you bear with me for a second. Okay, here's the new senator who took Harry Reid's spot, Senator Cortez Masto. And I think that her questioning was pretty decent as well.
Thank you. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member. As a new member of the committee, I look forward to working with all of you.
Welcome.
And thank you very much. And Dr. Carson, welcome.
Thank you.
And congratulations on your nomination, and welcome to your wonderful family sitting here with you. So there's been a lot of questions. With your indulgence, I'm just going to get right to them because I know it's getting a long day for you and morning. And just my colleagues have asked a number of questions, and I would like to just kind of reaffirm some of them. In your role as the leader of HUD, will you promise to protect the LGBTQ community from discrimination?
Absolutely.
And as we know, there's a long and well-documented history of patterns and policies of segregation of minorities in our neighborhoods. Would you continue to aggressively enforce the FHA, which is dedicated to ensuring access to our country's housing is free of discrimination, including expeditiously and thoroughly investigating race and national origin complaints, ensuring fair mortgage lending for homeowners, and carrying out strategies to end homelessness?
I think the Fair Housing Amendment in 1968 was one of the best pieces of legislation we've had. It was modified in 1988. LBJ said no one could possibly question this. I agree with him.
Good, so you would continue to enforce it aggressively?
Absolutely.
Including the new HUD rule that requires local communities to assess their own patterns of racial and income segregation and make genuine plans to address them.
I will be working with the local HUD officials and the communities to make sure that fairness is carried out.
Okay. I appreciate you taking the time to come to my office and sit with me. And in that meeting, you made a number of statements like you have this morning on your vision for HUD and how the department would or would not intervene in individuals' lives. Specifically, you said that we don't want year after year people vegetating in public housing. And these comments were a little concerning to me, and for this reason. In Nevada, the fair market rent for a two-bedroom apartment is around $950 per month. In order to afford this level of rent and utilities, a household has to earn $38,000 annually. Nevada, a minimum wage worker earns an hourly wage of $7.25 or $8.25 if their insurance isn't being paid for, which is about $15,000 annually. In order to just cover that two-bedroom rent apartment, that individual making minimum wage would have to work 88 hours per week, which, as you can see, doesn't leave much time for not only a funding for education or much other opportunities to further themselves other than just putting a roof over the head for them and their families. That doesn't sound like to me somebody who's vegetating in public housing. You also mentioned to one of my colleagues that you believe that additional housing funding, rental assistance is essential. But when we talked, you said there were limits. And do you believe that low-income Americans should have a limit to public assistance? And can you further define that for me?
Well, what I'm saying is that we have to be cognizant of our fiscal responsibilities as well as our social responsibilities. Would we love to put every single person in a beautiful unit forever? Absolutely, that would be ideal. But we don't necessarily have the necessary funding. But the other thing that I emphasize is that safety net programs are important. I would never, advocate abolishing them without having an alternative route for people to follow.
So how would you help somebody find that alternative if all they're doing is working and coming home and working and that's all they can afford? How would you help them other than giving them a time limit in that public housing and then they have to leave?
Well, there's a much bigger picture issue here.
All right, he's not going to answer the question. Now he's going to dance around it because she caught him.
And that is fixing our economy and working very hard to create the right kind of atmosphere. When that happens, people have a lot more options in terms of their jobs, and people have to raise their salaries.
Okay. And then Nevada was hardest hit. We were ground zero for the foreclosure crisis. As the Attorney General of the state, one of my biggest partners was your agency. Aggressively, we worked together to bring relief to homeowners there, including what you talked about, financial relief, but also financial literacy and education.
Right.
Through that, I created the Home Again program, and it still is in existence in the state of Nevada to provide financial literacy and help to homeowners for the first-time home buyers, for individuals who want to get back into their homes. Is that a program that you see that you can continue to support and would look to help support in the state of Nevada?
I will certainly study that program carefully and work with you to make sure that the goals of that program are carried forward.
Thank you. I appreciate your questions today, or excuse me, the answers to your questions today. Thank you very much.
He didn't give her a yes. He said he would study it. So in my opinion, that's dancing around the answer, especially if he's familiar with our program and it works. Hold on 1 second. All right, this is going to be the last question here, and it's Sherry Brown coming back in during the second round of questioning.
I want a little more specific on the issue that Senator Warren raised. Yesterday, the president-elect announced his intention to hang on to his investments, not put them into a blind trust. I appreciated, too, Senator Tester's very specific admonition about that. This creates particular problems for HUD since he has invested. We don't know his tax return, so there may be others. We know he's invested in at least one subsidized housing project, Starrett City. I wondered if you're aware of his stake there, and if you discussed Starrett City with the president.
I've not discussed it with him. I do know about it.
I don't see how HUD can avoid the appearance of a conflict should any issue arise on this property. Do you?
Well, what I would hope would happen with this committee is that we could come up with a suggestion that might be acceptable to all sides.
Here, let me start with one. Would you commit to report back to the committee on any issue that should arise on a property, Starrett or otherwise? Again, we don't necessarily know if there are others. Would you commit to report back on any issue that should arise on a property owned by Mr. Trump or his family, and any contact you or any subordinates received from the Trump organization or the White House or any other source other than normal back and forth between a project and its oversight officials? Would you commit to reporting to this committee anytime that arises?
I would be more than delighted to discuss those.
Will you then, thank you, will you set up a process to identify those conflicts?
I'll work with you to set that up.
Good, thank you for that commitment. One other question, respond, then I won't take my whole 5 minutes, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your comments and your testimony about the interaction between housing and health care. When Matthew Desmond signed his book to me, and I bought it, I want you to know that. He wrote on his book, Evicted, home equals life. And that, in a nutshell, says what you were saying between the connection between housing, health care, and so much else. And,
Right.
as I think Senator Van Hollen said, if you don't have a home, so many other things go wrong, obviously. So even if you are widely successful in promoting healthier housing, will it be any more than a drop in the bucket compared to the loss of health insurance for as many as 30 million Americans, including nearly 1 million in my state? Governor Kasich, a Republican, has admonished Republicans here, don't repeal the Affordable Care Act unless you replace it immediately, because what do I do with 700,000 people that have Medicaid now in Ohio? His words. So my question is, you responded to him that if you're going to, that you are seem less than enthusiastic about the way Medicare and Medicaid operate, so you said you would be willing to eliminate them, but only if something replaced them immediately. So does that mean that you would oppose the elimination of the Affordable Care Act without something replacing it immediately?
Yeah, I've said that many times. I don't think it's reasonable to pull the rug out from anybody. We always have to make sure that we are taking care of our citizens,
So if you
regardless of our political persuasion.
So if if you had been the senator from Florida instead of Senator Rubio, the vote last night might have been different on that. Thank you, thank you.
All right, so that was just a political shot. Anyway, I tried to keep this under an hour because I know how difficult it is in order to try to sit there and listen to something this long. So I think I was successful. I'm going to see when I put all of the clips together. Anyway, again, I'm not a big Ben Carson fan. He's got no experience in this arena. He made mention of trying to reduce, even though he danced around it. He basically wants to go in there and reduce the amount of funding that HUD uses. And in my opinion, that number should be increased, particularly given the fact that our population numbers are going up and our wages aren't rising as fast as the cost of housing and various other commodities of life are concerned.